about playing lane patterns, and a lot of times we're talking about the front to back, but for the league bowlers across the country, they usually have what's called a house shot, and they'll have their own little flavor, but there's some general characteristics they all have, and we kind of mapped it out here on this lane.
Right, and from the foul line to just past the dots, that's what where we're seeing our ball in the skid phase. It's where the heaviest volume of oil is.
And when you're playing these house conditions, instead of playing them so much front to back, you want to be playing left to right. You want to find the oil in the front part of the lane because you need the ball to get into the skid phase. You don't want it to start the hook phase too early, but you need to find the dry farther down the lane so the ball actually reacts. But it's very divine. As we come up here past the dots, you can see that the oil now is started coming in. So we have quite a dry area starting to be established right here on the outside.
Right. It's not as flat as what we see in a lot of our sport patterns. So there's a defined area where there's friction and where there's a buildup in the middle of oil.
Now, players that throw the ball very hard, extremely fast, higher tilt players, lower red players, they can get away with playing outside that second arrow going through the front part of the lane. But any of the hook players, your ball will end up being done before it gets to the back end.
Right. It's going to read too quickly through here, and when it gets down lane, it's going to be out of energy, and it'll appear that there's almost oil over there, but in the end, it's really just the opposite of that. There's less oil, the ball's read too early, too much, and it's ran out of energy down.
So there's a little bit of oil in here on the outside because the oil's not being applied there anymore physically from the pump, but it actually is on the brush, so it's kind of being feathered out. So the ball literally won't be changing direction here, but it will be slowing down, losing axis rotation. So when it does get to the back end, where you do want the ball to be changing direction, there's no axis rotation left. So as Kim said, it'll give the appearance that your ball's not hooking, you need a more aggressive bowling ball when it's just the opposite. You probably, if you want to play out there, you definitely need a shinier ball, less aggressive bowling ball. I've had times when I was in the pro shop business that bowlers would come and almost think that they're bowling on a reverse block because they say, oh, I'm playing outside, I can't get the ball to hook. Yet for the right-hand player, when they try to throw for a 4-pin, they say, boy, the ball went down and snapped. And that's because it actually still had some oil to retain axis rotation. And when they're outside, the ball was actually done. It just couldn't have any more hooks.
Right, and that has everything to do with what ball's in your hand and really how you throw the ball.
So it's so defined on the house condition. You can see that we got a lot of oil in the middle, and it gets a little narrower as we just get past the arrows, and that's pretty profound. There's pretty good definition going down the lane. The key is we want to find the oil in the front, some oil in the mid lane, but you need to feed it to the dry to actually smooth it out a little bit. So you really don't want to be playing these front to back.
Right. We always hear a lot of times when we're talking about house patterns is you want to find the oil line. You want to find where it's pretty defined, like Rod was saying in this pattern, where the friction or the lower volume of oil is and where the higher volume starts to hold up or build up. And that's where that oil line where we find our hold, which means our mistake room in.
But the misconception a lot of times with oil lines is you don't want to be following the oil lines. You want to go kind of cross the oil line. So a player that's playing second arrow here can end up being trapped or handcuffed because if they get it out a little bit, it loses so much energy, it starts slowing down, losing axis rotation. It doesn't have anything left. It gets in on that oil line, it just ends up going pretty straight. You get a lot of over-under. The key on these house conditions is play a little bit of left to right.
Right. When you're running into that, we'll start hearing people talk a lot about it being very wet, dry. And that's because they've played too close to that oil line. We want to find a way to start the ball so it's saved some energy and make sure that it gets to the friction or the lower volume of oil, that part of the lane, so it has the ability to change direction and go back towards the pocket.
I think that's a key about the wet-dry because the pattern, when it's applied, is actually a very wet-dry pattern. And to be able to blend this out, we want to kind of feather it out to the side. So depending on your type of player, your speed, how fast you throw it, your RPMs, will dictate when you want to come out of this center section and get it out here to the outside. But when we come down here, there's going to be a key where these cones, this is generally where we need to be feeding the ball. This would be kind of getting down into the break point area we want the bowling ball to get to. And we don't want it a little bit inside of that because you're going to have problems.
Right, if it happens inside, what happens? We just get, it never gets to the friction, so you end up having to you played the pattern too straight, and your mistakes are going to leave you washouts and all sorts of appearingly underreaction.
You're going to get so much over-under because the oil comes and then it just stops. So it's almost, they call it clipped a little bit, that when it comes off that, then it becomes so speed sensitive. You get a little bit faster, it really go a lot longer, a little softer, it jumped, and you're going to get a lot of over and under. So as the lanes start transitioning and breaking down, the key is you still want to be feeding it to the area of the cone out here. And your higher rev players, your hook players might be a little bit on the outside of that cone. Your straighter players might be right on top of that cone and vice versa. But even as the player starts moving left, we want to be feeding it into the zone. If a player ends up moving far left, we want to get a little more angular bowling ball to be able to recover and come back in. But if I see players a lot of times, when they're playing these, they move their target into this area here, and now they're trapped. You know, if they get it out a little bit, it hooks too much, and they get it inside, it doesn't come up, and that's when you start seeing the over-under.
Right, so those moves, actually, as they start to break down, we don't want to see too many parallel moves, because that's going to bring your break point, like Rod's saying, a little bit too much in the inside of the soil pattern. We want to make them more like 2 to 1, that sort of ratio, when you're moving your feet twice as much as you move your eyes, and that'll help kind of maintain that angle that we're looking for.
So one of the keys you want to make sure on house patterns, you want to find the oil in the front, you want to find the blanding in the mid lane, and you want to make sure that you get a point down the lane that smooths it out, that you're coming on the very outside of the pattern. We have 3 bowlers now. We're going to be bowling on this house condition and just kind of get a demonstration what happens a lot of times in a late night, or people that go out there and they end up fighting the lane pattern as opposed to actually playing the lane. So we have 3 bowlers.
Right, and we try to get 3 different, pretty distinct styles. Steven's going to be kind of a slower, kind of our hook player. Brenda a little bit more firm, and Matt would play the lanes a little bit more direct on a regular basis.
We're going to throw it a little bit faster, Brenda. Hey, we didn't have our super high rev player, but the same philosophy is going to be kind of going the same way. So they're out there and they're playing the outside of the lane. So they're trying to play it outside second arrow. And what are we seeing?
Well, with the first player, really I think what's happened is they've gotten a little bit too far right. Gotten the ball in the friction too soon, and it's really just reading too early, and it's just staying straight. It gives the illusion that there's a lot of oil out there and that they can't get it to hook.
It looks like it's bogging down. It really gives the appearance to a lot of players like, I need a more aggressive bowling ball. And a lot of times players will do this. They will think that this ball's not hooking, so they'll go to an earlier hooking bowling ball when they're playing out here. And what would be the result if they did that?
Kind of even a worse reaction. They'll bog down even more. It forces, they'll start to probably move a little more right, because on a house pattern we're expecting to see more friction to the right, and they're just going to get trapped in that area where there's just not a lot of relief. You're just going to see a lot of early hook, nothing on the back end, can't get it to the pocket.
So now we take a look at Matt's shot, and Matt's shot's playing outside, and you see very, very little response. The ball just doesn't make it up to the tip. And now we have Brenda, and Brenda's kind of playing in the same area, and what do we see on the ball?
Right, kind of the same reaction. It's getting started. We can see it kind of looks like it's reading the front part of the lane pretty good, but as it gets to the mid lane and down lane, it's still sort of unresponsive, goes a little straighter than I'm sure she's expecting.
So we're going to take our 3 players now, and we're going to move them more into the oil so they start playing the pattern, playing the lane pattern as a house condition, as opposed to fighting the pattern. So they're using the exact same equipment, and now let's take a look. So we're going to start again with Matt. We're going to have Matt throwing the ball first.
So here we have Matt. He's moved left on the approach, so his eyes and his feet have moved left. And you can see how he's starting it in the oil, but now it's saving more energy. And when it sees that dry part of the lane, or where there's a lower amount of volume, you can see the ball pick up, has more energy, changes direction better.
So you can see it comes out of the heavy concentration about halfway down the lane, and it gets fed into that break point that we were describing, just outside the pattern, and he has a really good, actually strong reaction, and the ball's coming back, and it looks pretty good. Now let's take a look at Brenda.
Brenda, even further inside of where her laydown is further inside of where Matt was. Sending it again a little bit further right off her hands. Her launch angle, the degree is a little bit sharper, because the important part is that she has to get it to the right of that oil so that it can turn around and hit the pins with more power.
Kind of hard to believe that actually was the same ball that she was using on the outside, because that ball looks like a brand new ball. It's very responsive, and that really amplifies the difference of flare. You want to get it, you find the oil, and then feed it to the dry. You don't want to get it to the dry too early. And last we have Steven.
Steven, our slower hook player, so pretty much big step left, higher rev rate, so he has to get further left, and then sending it, really just like the other 2, he's got to get it down lane, he's got to get it right.
He's going to be a little smoother down lane, because being the slower hook player has a a little bit more arc. It actually gets outside a little bit down lane, but still makes you recover back. As opposed to Brenda's, but Brenda's was a little bit more angular down lane. So I think what we need to do with our league bowlers and when they're bowling on house conditions is you want to need to find that oil in the front, and not necessarily be moving right all the time because you get into the dry too early. It affects the ball motion down lane. You can't see. We've had players at times think this term called reverse block because they're playing outside in the dry and the ball doesn't hook. And like we described earlier, they went across leg towards like 4-pin. Or even they try to shoot a 10-pin or, the 6-pin, they can't believe how much the ball hooks on the back end. So they think that, it's dry in the middle when it's just the opposite. We have oil to let the ball hook where it should be hooking down the lane.
Right, and this is the way they're designed. This is the way that will create the highest scoring pattern for house patterns that they're looking for. They want the scores to be a little bit higher, give you a little bit more room to the left and to the right.
And as the lanes transition and start breaking down or they get a lot of players bowling, you still want to be feeding it to that same spot. You just need to get a ball that goes a little, if you change a ball that goes a little bit longer and a little more angular. You can move a little bit. After a while, you can't move too much left for your style. You're not going to ever get Matt into where Stevens is because of his style. He's going to be better off moving a little bit left and then going to a ball that goes a little bit longer and a little bit angular in the back end.
Right, because you can get it there too quickly and it'll bounce right off and it's equally a bad reaction.
So hopefully we gave you some insight of how you can attack the house pattern when you travel to different bowling centers to your league. That you want to get it started in the oil, you want to kind of feed in the dry, but don't be worried if your ball or you're playing to the right and your ball's not hooking. You just haven't found the oil yet. The key is to find the oil and then feed it to the